Hey there, welcome to episode 160 of the Cafe Genius Impresarios audio program. I'm your host, Dan Hugo. We're recording this at 12:08 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time here in Greater Vegas on Friday, March 20th, 2026. We usually publish our new episodes of this program on Fridays. Try to get it in the morning. Honestly, I should have recorded this last night, but I just kind of finished. I was thinking, kind of want to let it rest for a moment. The title and topic of today's episode, community versus ecosystem. These are terms that come up quite a bit in the world of startup, city, startup region, resources, etc. We talk about the entrepreneurial innovation ecosystem quite often. There's a reason for that, which we'll get into today. So the Cafe Genius Impresarios audio program, if you're not familiar, first of all, Cafe Genius, cafe with two F's, an homage, remembrance of the no longer open and operating Cafe Centro, where startups start in the San Francisco Bay Area in South Park, which was it still is right near the what is now the Oracle ballpark. Used to be AT&T ballpark. And I believe before that it was the Pac Bell ballpark. I used to walk right by that area. Used to walk right by that area when I was working at Salon. I had a couple of different routes. I would take the Caltrain up to the San Francisco King Station, and then I could walk one of about 3 or 4 different ways, depending on the mood, I guess. So in one case, I could walk by the ballpark. So I used to walk by that area, the general area. And I had been to Cafe Centro many times. It was a cute little coffee shop. I'm not even going to refer to one of the people that was starting a startup back then, way back when. By the time I was going there, this company had already been in existence. But the take home, it's where startups started. It was a little bit of a landmark. It did not survive the pandemic, but we remember them with the name. Cafe with two F's. They, I believe, had an accent on their E. I'm trying to keep it simple, so no accent here. Genius is a recollection, something of an homage again to the Genius lunches that used to take place in the downtown Vegas area. These were ad hoc gatherings. Hey, are you around? We're having lunch tomorrow, kind of thing. No formal scheduling. No meetup.com entry, just whenever. And it was, I think somebody's vacuuming somewhere around here. If you hear that. Cafe Genius then is an homage to these two things, and they're both startup or entrepreneurialism related. The Genius lunches were mostly the downtown project folks here in Vegas, so pursuing startup or entrepreneurial endeavors or adjacent efforts and so on. So that's it. And then the impresarios, well, that's spelled with 2 S's, which it's a less common but still correct spelling. And Cafe Genius impresarios are the people doing it. So all of these things are about people accomplishing or pursuing, aspiring to pursue. And then we focus on the entrepreneurial innovation ecosystem. So all these things fit together into a sort of action adventure. And so we talk about that here on this audio program. Community versus ecosystem is today's title and topic once again. Hopefully wherever you found this audio program, you're able to locate the episode description, which contains the show notes, including a brief summary of 2 sentences. Yeah, 2 sentences. And the links, I will say I am reading a book right now called Startup Communities. I'm going to hold off on referring to it until I finish it, so I don't have a link to that. So, but that did sort of prompt this because it's ongoing. This conflation of community versus community and ecosystem, that they can be used interchangeably, and I will contend today that is not the case. So the usual links for today, but eventually we'll get to there are 2 books on my reading list. One I'm reading now, and the next one will follow, and then we'll talk about those in a later episode. It's Feld of the Boulder Thesis history. It's an older book, I think things have changed a little bit, but the fundamental premises are still there, and they're probably right. But again, haven't finished the book, so we'll see. On that note, let's get started. The summary of today's episode. I have said it before, I'm saying it again. Communities and ecosystems are emergent. They cannot be built in the sense that this term is often used, and they are also not the same thing. Let's talk about it. Indeed. The Cafe Genius homepage, still at cafe with two F's, caffegenius.org. I've been thinking about this a lot lately. There's a lot to do. There's a lot to do that I've taken on myself. One of the things I need to do is to update all my websites so that they look nice and they actually function. They're there. And the reason I mention them all the time is that I do want them to be the primary point of publication should I ever leave Spotify or whatever the case. So there should always be a place to locate my various endeavors. So I have that. It just doesn't look nice, but it's something that weighs on me because I have a lot of other things to do as well. And it's interesting that one of the things, and I don't want to get ahead of myself on the book topics, but one of the things I'm at the point now, he's discussing the need for leadership and leaders who are actually entrepreneurs to take on mentoring and leading roles within a, put your air quotes up, startup community. And I'm thinking to myself, this is a lot to hang on people. You need to have leadership and leaders, and they need to be, they need to be inclusive. And these are not, I'm not arguing, they're not bad things, but it is something of a load to put on somebody's shoulders that, oh, by the way, you have to, or you somehow are anointed or nominated and somehow voted in through some unusual balloting process, perhaps. So I'm like, oh, wow, that's putting a lot of pressure on people who are already trying to accomplish something. One of the reasons I was looking for entrepreneurs in residence, for example, is to not make this a sort of I don't know how you would ideally pick people, but people who actually take a proactive interest in how the ecosystem functions, what's missing, what works, and so on, who could be literally entrepreneurs in residence. Hey, I'm here. I've gone through some of this stuff, and I'm explicitly in a position to be helpful, mentoring, guiding, to lead in some way. But I think the notion presented in the book so far is that, oh, you just sort of assume a leadership role. You step up. Hey, I'll do this. And I don't know that you always get the best outcomes with that, because people who are willing to do such things may or may not necessarily be able to do such things, willing and able. So it gives me pause, but this is something, it's on my list of things that I think are important to weigh heavily. Not weigh heavily, that sounds odd. To weigh seriously. Maintaining websites, launching web apps, pursuing other startup ventures that are tangential or adjacent, engaging with other people, trying to draw them into conversations vis-a-vis the Genius Roundtable, all the things that are in Initiative 2026, and so on. We should do a refresh on that just so we can sync up on some of because the times are certainly changing in real time lately. I think it's going to be much more essential that people pursue their entrepreneurial aspirations, at least. Things are getting weird on a global economic scale, but scale, and personal economies, I think, need to be accounted for. And yeah, some of those should be, I've always wanted to start that side business, and maybe you should. So Cafe Genius homepage basically needs a lot of work, but then every single thing I'm working on does. And solopreneurship requires a lot of energy. The host profile page, linking everything, and I do include the word host because of all of my audio programs, this audio program is most likely to have a guest. We used to have guests, and one day I will reach out to people again and try to get guests. If we can get the Genius Roundtable up and running for cohort 2, if people actually take an interest, that will be possible guests right there. But for your host, that's me. The buymeacoffee.com/Dan Hugo profile page is a free-form link tree with links to everything I'm working on. the audio programs, projects, some affiliate links. You do not have to buy me a coffee explicitly, but any funds that come in through there do go towards coffee accessories. buymeacoffee.com/danhugo/posts is where you will find the weekly Monday morning Buy Me an Update. It used to be published exclusively on Buy Me a Coffee. And by the way, that profile page is 5 years old this month. But then I found that people were not discovering Buy Me an Update because who goes to Buy Me a Coffee to listen to podcasts? So I still publish it there first, but then it gets published in the usual places. Links to all of this at buymeacoffee.com/danhugo. Now let's get started with today's episode. We'll start out with some terms. The ecosystem. There is a biology ecosystem. That's sort of the origin, I think. Ecology. So living things in an ecosystem with an entire science around this concept, again, ecology, and a fairly straightforward collection of items that make up what an ecosystem is and how it functions. By the way, you can look up, I didn't want to go too far down the analog rabbit hole, although I kind of do, but an ecosystem and its biome. The biome is the living stuff. The ecosystem has components that the biome interacts with, so they're kind of a two great tastes kind of thing. The economic ecosystem, or any variety of ecosystems envisioned and described by various people, and for example, the gamer ecosystem or the developer ecosystem. These are you hear these thrown around a lot, and I think they often mean a developer community or gamer community. I think ecosystem is misused in some cases. But anyway, there's a variety of ecosystems described by various people with, they'll either have a similarly intertwined collection of properties or the term is misused. The term, singular. So an ecosystem, the elements of the ecosystem kind of depend on each other a little bit. The water and the sunlight. I mean, some of them, the sun is going to be shining no matter what. Although I suppose if there's enough emissions of gases into the atmosphere, that can be obscured. Temperatures go up. So anyway, so ecosystem though is a interdependencies of various elements are important, and they should be recognized and understood to some degree. Or the term is misused, and I think it often is. Let us presume the former, that we actually are working with something that has intertwined or interconnected or interdependent elements. So let's review let's review some analogies so that we can connect what I just described. And we'll get to our entrepreneurial innovation ecosystem in the greater Vegas area at the end here. So subpoints. If you were to find yourself shipwrecked on a tiny island, as Tom Hanks was in the Castaway movie, the ecosystem you find yourself in is the island and some of the sea around it. If life on the island consumes fish or other sea life, it is included. So the land and the sea kind of intermingle, right? So they're included in the circle, if you like, the circle or the boundary drawn around the ecosystem. And if the sea life consumes life from the island, same deal. So Hanks had to exist in this ecosystem until he could leave, which was non-trivial. So he entered an ecosystem and became dependent on it. He was also having impact on it. So there is a sort of a two-way street there. His impact was possibly substantially less than its impact on him, but still, so it's a two-way. Think back to high school now, which you may still be living in at the moment if you're in high school, or perhaps a distant memory, as is my case. The campus, the fences, the classrooms, the cafeteria, the school buses and parking lots, the playing fields, all that is the ecosystem in which most will typically spend about 4 years. We'll get to the communities part in the next section, but so keep that in mind. The ecosystem is all these resources that depend on each other and intermingle and so on. And then there is our ecosystem, of which I have spoken countless times. The 4 pillars as a reminder, and there could be more of these pillars, or they could be broken out, or people may have other opinions, but I try to keep it simplified. So some of these have multiple components that could be drawn into the conversation. So first one, access to capital. That's like a universal truth. Any book you read about any of this stuff, any conversation is going to have a question about, well, where are we going to get some money? I ask myself that every day. So access to capital. So the ecosystem has to have capital in it somewhere, either from somewhere else. But so you can imagine that capital that is injected from other places far away, perhaps, you can argue that it's injected into the ecosystem and then becomes available for its eventual recipient. So the capital is accessible here. Yeah. Maybe it's not natively here. The talent pool, I have on occasion sort of made talent pool and educational resources a single item, and they probably are, but then that assumes that education is where the talent pool comes from. But the talent pool could be emergent on its own. People just are able to do things. They have an innate capability. You'll find this with like creativity. You don't need to go to school to be a creative person. People that will relocate into the area, the talent pool can grow regardless of the local educational resources. So let's just generically say the talent pool, and that sort of implies educational resources and something attractive that might bring more people into the talent pool and so on. An innovation culture, and this one, I've gone around on this one a few times. Innovation culture is generally the notion that around here, wherever you are, around here, there's a feeling, there's an intangible, that there's some energy, there's some interest, right? And the reason that's an important thing to sort of grok is innovation culture does not mean every single person needs to be pursuing a startup to be a part of the ecosystem. It's really interesting. And in this book I'm reading now, he points out, you're going to have attorneys and accountants and people in other professional services that are adjacent. My word, I can't remember how he describes it exactly, but these are people that are part of the culture in that they are willing to help out. They're willing to, emergency vehicle, production by the street, if you can hear that. They're willing to offer special rates, service now, pay later. Maybe they act as an investor working on consignment. So that's interesting. But also, if you are in a place where people, the general population, are actually interested in what's happening, they'll show up for demos. They're curious to know what's happening with the so-called startup scene, right? The local media actually talks about it and covers it as front page news now and then. This was true in the Silicon Valley of old. The San Jose Mercury, very popular front page news items would be about startups and funding and accomplishments and merger, all that stuff was front page news in the San Jose Mercury. The San Francisco Chronicle, there were other, just a variety of news sources still in the print media days. So the culture of innovation in Silicon Valley is hard to deny. It had been emerging sort of organically for 100 years. But having an innovation culture means not everybody has to be pursuing a startup, but people are generally interested in it, or they're aware, they're excited by it. Some of the people that are in your communities might actually be local funding sources, right? So they may be a part of the access to capital. If there's an innovation culture, you're probably, and I've had a couple of conversations, not scientific but anecdotal, with VC types of people. And if there's an innovation culture in a place, they're a little bit more confident about investing in the locality, because the presence of this culture, the existence of it, the prevalence perhaps, is kind of a good sign that there's that energy level, there's interest, there's possibly a talent pool to draw from, right? It's a talent pool, innovation culture. They kind of overlap. Again, access to capital, innovation culture, all these things sort of intermingle, like I said. So an innovation culture could be the actual entrepreneurial innovators. It could be people starting lifestyle businesses. And I personally tend to sort of cast a wide net in the startup communities. He definitely has a difference between a growth startup and a small business. But personally, I think the challenges are different, but there are challenges that are similar enough that starting a small business, starting a restaurant or a coffee shop or a bookstore, I've said this many times, and starting a software company, they're different types of challenges, but there's this sort of a camaraderie, I think, that comes out of that. So anyway, the innovation culture is where people are thinking outside the box. They pursue new ideas. Maybe they don't always wait for someone else to do it. They take an active interest in the general tenor of their ecosystem. And then there's infrastructure and regulation. These are where the government should step in. Infrastructure is one of those things like roads and internet access and water and electricity that, individuals, I guess you can do that if you have a lot of access to capital. But generally speaking, your city, your town, your county, your state, the federal government in some cases will work on this infrastructure. And in addition, there will be regulation and legislation about certain things that could be helpful or they could be obstructions, but that's where they come from. So the ecosystem includes these basic rules and the physical interconnection between various things by way of this infrastructure. So government plays a role there. It's arguable that government should play very little role otherwise. Here in Greater Vegas, a lot is hung on the LVGEA, for example, the Global Economic Alliance, a public-private partnership which focuses on the economy and studying the economy and offering advice, I guess, to someone. They do a lot of collaborating with other organizations, including EDON, which is the equivalent. It's I never can remember what this stands for. The WN is Western Nevada. It's the economic something. Let me look it up just so I can actually say that I pretended to know what it was. EDON, the Economic Development Authority of Western Nevada, of course. So that's the equivalent. So LVGEA, EDON, and then there's a whole bunch of Nevada that has sort of question marks, I guess. Like there are cities and there are city government infrastructure elements. I don't know if everyone has an equivalent of an EDON and LVGA, but certainly they focus on economic development in some way. But the thing is, here in Southern Nevada, I think there was too much weight put on LVGEA to be a part of the development of an entrepreneurial innovation ecosystem. First of all, you can't really develop one, in my view. So we'll get to that. But also, they're really focused on economic development with specific outcomes. So while they did have a senior vice president of entrepreneurial development, I think it was, they were really focused on a particular type of startup. Software engineering was one of the KPIs for the role. Like you should have an increased number of software engineers. You should have an increased number of funding and exit rounds and so on. So they were definitely leaning into entrepreneur equals software startup. And so when government gets into that, or maybe they want to dictate what sort of like, hey, we're going to be an innovation hub that focuses on AI. And I have found in my travels that the innovation decisions are made by people with good ideas. Those people are the entrepreneurs, in my view, not necessarily the people in the government. So the government should say, we're going to enable innovation. And then they should listen to the people on the ground, right? Like, so what makes sense here? And if everybody says, it's got to be AI, you probably need to increase the number of people in the room. Because it's very rare that everyone will say, got to be internet, got to be AI, got to be blockchain. Those are usually parts of a bigger story. So we could talk about that a lot more down the road. Think about these three examples and how similar they actually are, though. The resources are not the same between them, but there are these resources. They all need each other, so to speak. Your classrooms need a campus. The life on the island needs sun and some access to fresh water somehow. And then the sea life needs some things that come in from the island itself. All this stuff sort of intermingles, like I said. And our ecosystem, speaking is tricky on a Friday morning. Our ecosystem in Greater Vegas needs talent, which I usually pair with educational infrastructure, as I've said. Two great tastes taste right together. But again, doesn't have to be, because people can come in from other sources. And a culture of innovation, these two and the other two, the access to capital and infrastructure and regulation, all four combine and reinforce each other. Remove one, the others suffer. So that's an important difference that we'll get to next. There's an interdependency, there's an intermingling, like I said. So, and there could be more, there could be others. your ecosystem where you are might benefit from certain physical geographical resources, or if you're in the solar business and you have a lot of sunlight, that might be a little bit easier for development purposes, for testing, right? So if your ecosystem is in the solar belt where you benefit from sunlight and so on, that can be very different from a place that is closer to the water and you develop more hydroelectric technologies and whatnot. So there are some subtle differences about geographical resources, for example, that you could bring in. But so my pillars are fairly generic by design. The community, on the other hand, what is a community? The basic definition of a community is a collection of entities, and we'll say people, but these could be animals or even plant life. And if you're thinking, wait, what? Coral reefs, those are communities of sea life that have particular needs and goals and whatnot. So it doesn't have to be humans. Communities of animals in general. Plant life, there could be kelp, like huge swaths of kelp where sea life intermingles with the plant life. That's something of a community. So anyway, community has a similar entities, people though, and we'll focus on that for a second. They have a similar purpose, needs, goals, identity, and so on. So it could be a physical, like geographical locality, neighborhoods, or it could be online. It could be that one might use community and ecosystem as though they are the same things. I hear that all the time. And in fact, in this book in particular, communities are something we can talk about. Ecosystems are something usually used by academics, but they're not the same thing. And we can begin with this very simple test. If you are a member of a community, can that community relocate itself to somewhere else? Can you do that with an ecosystem? Think about it. Exactly. No, you cannot. So your community, and we'll get into one specific example that everybody has done. Your community can move, and you can move between communities as well. But the ecosystem is pretty much fixed. It's stuck in the ground, and so you cannot say, "Oh, hey, let's." And even re-implementation, right? You can't say, "Oh, let's take some parts of the desert and implement them in this rainforest." You're just going to be in one or the other. There's a reason that they can be identified as separate things. So an ecosystem, it's really difficult to move or to easily copy in a place that isn't already similar. But communities can kind of move around. They can be online, they can be in person. You can be in more than one community. You can enter and leave a community without actually moving. You don't have to get up and move to a different table necessarily. Might be necessary. But I can be in a community while I'm talking to you right now. I'm in the startup community of Greater Vegas. But then by the end of this sentence, I might say, you know what? I don't want to be in that community anymore. I'm done. I'm no longer, right? But it'd be very tricky for me to say, I am no longer in the Greater Vegas entrepreneurial innovation ecosystem. That would require some physical relocation to a different place. Far away, not out of the question. Now, this may not be a universal truth, with some animals being particularly sensitive to temperature or diet. Maybe they lean more towards being elements of an ecosystem than a community. So, the analog is not 100% solid. But for the most part, think about our other two ecosystem examples. Back in high school, the incoming freshmen, right, are probably a pre-existing community from junior high school or 8th grade, or however the schools are aligned in wherever you are or wherever you were. They are initially distinct from the sophomores and so on. So this community has now moved. They've picked up and relocated to a completely different campus, and they've reoriented themselves to be a different part of the overall, the biome, the various communities that already exist. They have to kind of fit themselves in there. They have to make themselves a part of this new ecosystem in which they find themselves. So they're initially distinct, but you know what? Eventually, there's a little bit intermingling between the communities as well. There are the jocks, the nerds, the drama dorks, the ROTCs, the marching band, and then we have the people in our actual classrooms across graduating classes, So you may be in a classroom with some seniors and some juniors, especially if you're taking your electives. Maybe you're in a club after school. Maybe you're in the chess club or math club, or maybe you run cross country, or who knows. So whatever you're doing, you're going to start running into others because the ecosystem has communities that actually commingle, intermingle, but they can still leave. So the ecosystem elements commingle and intermingle, but they're not going anywhere usually. Little communities within the ecosystem are just basically fluid. Now, you could have communities of people that don't like each other. That's a different thing, but it's also possible. Competitors, say. Let's not be predatory. No predator-prey relationships in a high school, I hope. You never know, though. Look out. The entrepreneurial innovation ecosystem can hold many communities. It would be a spectacularly short-sighted to believe that there is a startup community, and I'm not fond of that label, which is sometimes also called a startup scene. Also not a fan of that label. But also within this ecosystem is the fun economy and plenty of space for long-term established businesses and so on. And so to say that there's a startup scene, I think is problematic because it assumes that you are either a part of the startup scene or you are not. The startup scene may not be for you. So to imply that there can be only one, I believe is problematic. And so I've actually been an advocate for a second story, as I call it, which is where people that are actually entrepreneurial, that are actually pursuing their endeavor or endeavors, they have a startup that they're pivoting, or they're going for other funding, or they're pursuing product development, whatever it is. These people are not in need of the same sort of community outreach and engagement and elevation and so on as people that are aspiring or nascent. So your startup communities, plural, and again, I still hate that word, but startup communities can be different. They can be adjacent. They can overlap. They can be far away. They may be geographically like, the people in Summerlin here in Vegas. People in Summerlin have a startup community that is sort of distinct from a startup community in the southeast, like near Henderson. So does that mean they're competitors? Probably not. Does that mean they all have to go to the same meetups? Definitely not. So these little communities or groups of people that have similar needs and interests and so on may find it that what they need is easier found in a community over there or a community over here and so on. So I think it's incorrect to suppose that there must be I suppose. There's a startup community, there can be another startup community. So there isn't one, there can be more than one. Now, on the other hand, because I've already, the fun economy is a completely separate sort of thing. These are, they're based on tourism and people here for entertainment and gaming and sports and all that. It's for fun, and it is a trademark term held by the University of Nevada, Las Vegas Department of Economic Development, granted in February of 2025. It's good for them. And you have the long-term businesses and so on. And these are different kinds of communities. You have your Chamber of Commerce is a container for communities of people that are in business. Chambers of Commerce are sometimes friendly to startups, sometimes not. And that comes down to like membership fees and what they actually focus on, interests of the bigger business versus small. But anyway, so these different communities may compete in some ways. They may be cooperative in other ways. It's fine. In fact, can one region support more than one ecosystem? That's a different question. It's a great question. I think in a bioanalog, we might be thinking about maybe a savanna, for example, with a big watering hole somewhere, or a stream maybe, and some trees, some areas with tree cover, so there's more shade, and some things that like to live in trees, and large open areas between the trees, and some things like to hang out in those open areas. Communities of some animal species will hang out in the trees. Others will fly over the open areas. Some will live in the open areas. And communities may intermingle at the watering hole. That's a common thing. You'll see predators and prey kind of taking a break so they can get some water. And then suddenly something will happen. And that's usually the stuff that makes it onto YouTube, right? Nobody, nobody's going to post an hour of video of animals just chilling by the watering hole. Similarly, the ecosystem of Greater Vegas has different areas which lend themselves to different sorts of businesses and people. This seems to work. We can discuss during our roundtable, cohort 2. Since we touched on bioecosystem, though, which is the interaction of a regional biome with regional resources, so it still makes sense. Consider a community of small animals on our island, which sometimes fall prey to airborne or even waterborne predators. If they happen to find themselves in the wrong place at the wrong time, so these communities will develop warning mechanisms, for example, to help stick around longer. So they end up helping each other. Oh, look out, there's a bird, or watch out for that fish. Especially when all the animals suddenly jump back from the water. That's usually a sign. So the animals nearby learn to look for these sorts of warning signs. Communities can look out for each other and may also work together to thwart attackers in our other communities, or to attack other communities, hopefully in the form of competition if it's economic. Community and biome are closer in meaning and use than community and ecosystems, obviously. So can you have more than one ecosystem in a geographical area? I'm going to guess it's probably more likely that two ecosystems are generally going to have different government influence, mostly. So in other words, it may be legal to do something in city of North Las Vegas where you cannot do it in the city of Las Vegas. There might be sales tax or some sort of legislation regarding the access to internet, or maybe there's some policy about libraries or whatever it is. So that you're more likely to encounter ecosystem differences on administrative boundaries. There's various laws that don't apply if you're on the Strip, for example, because the Strip is in unincorporated Clark County. Once you cross over, like basically Sahara, the road, you're going to be in or very near the city of Las Vegas southern boundary. So you'll then be in a different collection of laws and rules and whatnot. So it's more likely that ecosystems would be adjacent according to city or administrative boundaries like that. Because essentially, if you are in one of those administrative boundaries, you have access to capital, for example. No one's going to, well, not no one. There may be city grant programs, so access to capital may vary also within these. But for the most part, people are not going to pay attention to administrative boundaries for things like culture, right? There's not going to be a talent pool where they say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I can't cross this line. I gotta work on this side of the street." So some aspects I think would be separable by those administrative boundaries. But for the most part, the ecosystem is going to be locality or even regionally based. Whereas communities can move around. You can have multiple communities. They can be intermingling. They can be overlapping. They can be competitive, whatever the case may be. My opinion. Yours may differ. You can tell me about it. Now, there's a special case of community, the online community, which gathers around similar interests and needs and whatnot, like a normal community, like a normal in-person or physical world community, but with the underlying ecosystem essentially irrelevant. Essentially. Sure, we could say that Twitter or Facebook are the ecosystem, the YouTube chat, the Discord, whatever, right? You can say that that's the ecosystem. That's really more of the watering hole, right? That's a component of a potential ecosystem, but it's not an ecosystem of its own design, or even someone else built Twitter. Hint, some of it was built while sitting in front of a laptop at Cafe Centro, for better or worse. But the ecosystem, you're not going to go to hang out in a Slack or a Discord server and have access to capital. Now, you may be in a community of people that includes venture capitalists, and they may say, "Oh, why don't you come into my office?" Okay, you've met people, so you're intermingling at the community level, but there's nobody that's going to say, "Oh, let me just make some funds available for Discord," for people in a Discord server, right? So I think my opinion, this one, I could go either way in some cases if there was a suitable argument, but my view, communities online, virtual communities, if you will, they just have so much diversity potential as far as location, background. You may not even know who you're really talking to. Anonymity is a component. So I don't think these are communities in the same sense that a community in an ecosystem with economic implications, entrepreneurial innovation in general, et cetera. So I wouldn't say that they are identical, community and online community. The platforms like Twitter, Facebook, Discord, whatever, they're facilitating communication. They're doing more of that than providing resources of any kind. Again, you might identify a person, maybe it's a person, maybe it's a robot, who knows, and they may make some assertions about having resources to offer, but these are transactional network connections until there's some sort of real world implication. So I think keeping it completely virtual, I don't think it's really identical or even maybe similar, arguable. But I would argue that online communities are communities without a proper ecosystem, and that's my take. With the interaction not between a biome and an ecosystem resource collection, but between members of the biome only, if we want to make the biology analogy. So I'll accept a lengthy discussion on this at the next roundtable gathering if we can get those going. I was almost going to say that online communities are like a zoo. I didn't want to be condescending but generally you create these little mini, kind of a copy of an ecosystem, a simulation, so that an animal, caged animals, unfortunately, they can be comfortable with where they are. Now you can have an indoor, I think there were like penguin something, I don't know, something with penguins where they kept an indoor area very cold. But for the most part, the actual ecosystem, wherever a zoo is located, will have a substantial impact on the attempt to make animals from different ecosystems, from different climates and so on, to make them comfortable or even able to survive. So that's not a good analogy. So didn't go there. But yeah, so online communities are sort of a distillation of in-person physical communities, gatherings, and the ecosystem that underlies those, wherever they are. It's kind of interesting when so sometimes there'll be an online community that meets up in a physical location. So during CES here in Vegas, or NAB, NWA maybe coming here, SEMA shows, the Electric Daisy car, so these are all gatherings of people from faraway places. So they're adopting the ecosystem of the locality for some of its parts, right? So certainly there will be regulations concerning gatherings of huge groups of people. There will be resources available, like a space to meet and accommodations, access to water and electricity. So the ecosystem itself still plays a role, even when these communities that are either online or have an interest in common but don't actually interact. When they come together in a physical location to interact, these are multiple communities that overlap around synchronizing and maybe common interests, etc. So that's very interesting. But for something, you could have virtual startup communities, I suppose, if you really want to go crazy. And then every once in a while you meet up in a city. You see this with open source, especially open source development. They'll have a conference in Belgium or Miami or wherever, right? So they still work together online, but occasionally they'll meet up in person. So we can go down that rabbit hole much more in another episode, because I think it is worth talking about the value of online community and the value of online communities gathering in person and what that actually means, and how those sorts of gatherings can actually have some minor impact on an ecosystem in the real world. Case in point, CES, one of the largest gatherings of people in the consumer electronics industry. The Consumer Technology Association is the entity that drives that. You're bringing together all kinds of people every year. So the city of Las Vegas and Henderson and North Las Vegas and Production by Street, and people that are and entities in the unincorporated Clark County area and so on, they contend with a certain population shift a little bit, usually 150 to 200,000 people that all have a particular interest, and a lot of them are paying through their companies. So room rates will go up and so on, so that the ecosystem makes a minor little tuning of itself for a little while. So it's kind of interesting. I think there's a lot more to talk about in the social dynamics and so on of communities that move around or who are not all in the same place physically often. So now how about building these things? Okay, now is where I get upset, or I upset some people. I actually don't think about it too much, except for right now. You cannot build community, and you can't really build an ecosystem. You can affect them proactively, but ultimately they are more emergent than constructible. The example I usually give for this is the notion of a farm. So suppose you're a farmer, right? You're a farm builder, and you want to grow wheat. If you're gluten intolerant, maybe you can say you want to grow corn. You can till some land, ensure access to water, plant some seeds, make sure parasites and other problems like viruses and predators, you don't want the locusts to come through and chew up everything, literally. Make sure that they don't kill your crop, and then eventually you'll harvest and enjoy some of whatever you just grew. The sun, the wind, the water to some extent, you can try to guide it, make sure that it doesn't run dry, literally, with irrigation practices and water channeling and probably water rights access and so on. Random small creatures looking for seeds to snack on, or again, the locusts or some mass attacks. Other challenges are all a part of this ecosystem and are therefore, for the most part, beyond your control. You can try to block the animals, but the animals are part of the ecosystem, right? They're part of the biome in the ecosystem. So while you influence the ecosystem in some ways by tilling soil and so on, right? So you've made a material change to some little, fractional square units in this overarching ecosystem. It is also an ecosystem from before you arrived on the scene, and it will be there when you leave and so on. As for your wheat, right? So you made a little change in your community that is your farm. As for your wheat or your corn, you are not growing it. I know that's crazy, right? Wait, what? No. If you really think about it, your wheat or your corn is growing itself. You're more of a facilitator. You're there to service the wheat, but you are not growing the wheat. The wheat is growing itself. The corn is growing itself. So by building a farm, you're setting up some conditions and you're maintaining certain aspects. You're defending against some parts of the ecosystem and the biome and so on. But technically, are you building the wheat? No. Are you building the corn? No. So that's maybe a stretch. That's some lateral thinking there. But when people claim they're building an ecosystem, well, maybe they are putting together a venture fund or lobbying for friendly regulation and legislation or for some infrastructure that enables some new business. And perhaps you can somehow convince people with various relevant talents to relocate to an area. You'll get that sometimes with businesses who establish a presence and move some of their employees. Silicon Valley certainly drew people just because of its reputation for a while in the 90s, or become otherwise available, right? Maybe talent just is there suddenly, and you make them aware of the opportunities and so on. So there are some things that you could call building. Building culture is a huge challenge, and if we believe that whatever you define as the list of ecosystem components, that they are all interrelated in various ways, culture itself especially could take a while, right? Culture might emerge because, oh man, there's a lot of capital around. There's a lot of startups forming, and there's more and more people with various talents that are either coming out of our schools or they're moving here, they're relocating from other areas. We're gaining some economic success in some way. We're pricing some people out of the marketplace. Goodbye, fun economy people. You can't afford to live here anymore. But look at all this exciting and emerging coolness happening, right? Silicon Valley was always, again, making the news. So there was always something going on, which kind of formed a little feedback loop. And the culture of innovation in Silicon Valley had existed since the gold rush days. I did an entire episode about that, episode 85, if you want to learn more about that. So building culture is probably the least likely to happen. Culture is one of those things that just emerges over time. like people with common interest, communities, I suppose, but they'll find each other eventually. And maybe you are facilitating meetups. Okay. So if building is something like that, sure, you can build an ecosystem. But when you really think about it, an ecosystem is far too complicated to really build. You can try to influence it in some ways. You can start a farm. You can try to draw more investment capital. You can actually make it easier for potential investors to discover successes. So you make the place more attractive. If that's building, well, okay. If we lean back on our bio analogy or a bio analog of ecosystems, what do you suppose it would take to convert a desert into a rainforest, right? You can't build a rainforest where a desert is in any sort of normal scale. That would be some serious building. And you might be thinking, oh, wait, hey, Las Vegas is a desert, and that was converted to it was converted to a desert with air conditioning, water capture, pavement, shelters. But we're all still in a desert. If you ever are wondering, are we really still in a desert? Ask about how much water we actually have. Ask about why there are coyotes and rattlesnakes and scorpions showing up in people's yards or inside their homes, right? We are living in the desert. We've happened to have made it, just like our farm, we've made it hospitable, but we've not changed the ecosystem of the greater Vegas or Southern Nevada area. We've adapted to it. So something to think about. You can build adaptations, I suppose. That might be another conversation for another time. How do you function? Maybe, I mean, if you want to make, and by the way, I will argue that the downtown project kind of attempted something like this, where you create a little enclave where you say, okay, we're going to change the rules a little bit here. We're going to make access to capital a component of being and focusing your attentions on this downtown project region. So if you are quote unquote in the downtown project with your startup, you will have access to city as a startup thinking, localized investment, right? Oh, we are also part of the downtown project. You will get investment. That is one way to go. And that is in itself another conversation perhaps, but can that really be successful? Who knows? That's for our retrospective and introspective initiatives to ponder. Now, if you're thinking about building a community, let us look at some human communities. People who live on your street or in your apartment building are something of a community. You all share physical locations, access to those locations, probably common water pipes, electricity. If there's a power outage, probably affects people on your street or in your neighborhood, etc. You may never speak to these people. You have no idea who they are. They don't know you, etc. People on that high school campus, in a workplace, the regulars at your school, could be a junior high school. It doesn't have to be high school, but educational resources, workplace resources, the regulars at your local, these communities are emergent and are subject to collapse, but also to grow and shrink without your direction, without any direction. People might just start coming more. They might decide they've moved on to other things. You stay in touch with a couple of them. Your high school graduation takes place, and then you may never hear from any of those people again, or maybe you all get together every month, or whatever the case. So communities can move around and all that. So are you building communities in this case? If you consider yourself a community builder, you are probably working out free food or beverage arrangements, for example. You're inviting performances or other guests or attractions. Hey, we're going to have a speaker this month at our little gathering. Maybe you have some special benefits for people who identify as members of a community. Maybe you're like the HOA president and you go around making sure people's garbage cans are in the right place, or who knows. But if we're being really honest, sustainable communities are emergent. They form on their own and they last as long as they are supposed to, as long as there is reason to remain. And if a real world community needs to find a new place to meet up, they will, or without, with or without a community builder. Right? Sometimes somebody will take I found another place. We can go there because this place is shutting down, whatever. So some of the contentions in the book I mentioned earlier, where someone ascends to a leadership position and there's a mentor, it sounds like that's a little bit structured. And while that can be beneficial, I think to put all that weight on people's shoulders, like, oh, you're the community builder, it's a lot of responsibility to put on people that don't necessarily. And, one of the points made is you have to commit to being in a place for 20 years. I don't know about that. But again, this book is older. It's the second edition, but so I'm taking some of it with a grain of salt. But I don't know that community building is like a job I think if it is a job, then it's probably a job where you do other things also, I hope. So why is all this important? This is the final section, by the way, coming up on 1 hour. Why is this important? I have referred to the Vegas bourgeoisie in an entire episode of this program. It was named the Vegas bourgeoisie. And the problems that I suggest ensue when people who wish for economic diversity and some form of ecosystem alteration and community development can simply do so from on high and obtain some benefit for their efforts. But who exactly? Who, aside from themselves, maybe? I'm sure they get paid to do these things. It depends on who benefits. There may be some money draws, more money approach to it. Formula One race is arguably something like that. There may be bias in some decisions that benefit some more than others. Whether we want to draw in Amazon and Google or smaller companies or focus more on startups. There's probably an overall economic development model that's in place that says, we want to go for more sustainable businesses over a very long term. Maybe, who knows? Could be a lot of things. Often decisions are made not necessarily behind closed doors, although they may be made behind, there may be private meetings and so on, but certainly away from the full attention of the people who will be impacted, possibly adversely, by some decisions. So unless you're going to the county commission and the city council meetings, or maybe you're able to be on the inside track for LVGEA meetings or Chamber of Commerce meetings, right? Oh, are you a member? Well, you got to kind of be a member. So there's some velvet ropes around, and I'm not a fan of that, but it is what it is. What happens when outside characters enter the ecosystem, by the way? They form a community or two of whomever and attempt to shift focus, attention, or direction. Let's look at examples like the Horowitz Foundation or A16Z. So Ben Horowitz of Andreessen Horowitz apparently lives in Las Vegas, in unincorporated Clark County, or maybe in Summerlin. I think he lives in Clark County, so not in Las Vegas. He donated a dozen or so Cybertrucks to the LVMPD. His family foundation has donated money for the Flock traffic cameras that are in place. And so some of these things don't have to be disclosed because they're not city funds, they're private donations. He claims he's recommending that through A16Z that some of their investment companies relocate to Vegas. That's up to him. He can drive that. But does that benefit the place or does that benefit his investments? That's a good question. He doesn't have to tell anyone. He doesn't have to describe any of that. Of course, Mark Wahlberg, the Wahlburger restaurants here, at least one, are here in Vegas. He was an advocate for the Hollywood 2.0 efforts to move production studios to the Vegas area with a collection of incentives and discounts and rebates and whatever. Free gambling, probably. so Mark Wahlberg was advocating for this, and he was kind of the face of the effort. And as is usually the case here in Vegas, the press would be focusing on Mark Wahlberg. Celebrities are moving to Vegas, like Mark Wahlberg and Dean Cain, and that would be it. Is there a third one, perhaps? There are celebrities that live in Vegas, but they would focus on Mark Wahlberg and Dean Cain. Those are the two names that would come up. So Mark Wahlberg's family moved to Florida. I don't know how interested he remains in the Vegas area. He's got the restaurant business, and I think he might have opened a bar or something. But I believe he did move. News reporting from a couple of months ago was that his family moved to a sort of an exclusive neighborhood in Florida. Good for him. Good for them. But you look at, so those are personal people steering. You've got the Las Vegas Tech Summit, which is mostly people from outside of Las Vegas paying a nice tidy sum to hang out at this guy's house who's from San Francisco, who operates a company that is completely remote workers. So he only has one person, him, in the Vegas area about his company, but he's in, oh, you should move here. You should relocate your workforce here. The housing is cheap, so go ahead and gentrify it and so on. So understanding all these things and the way the ecosystem is functioning and what happens when you inject a disruption and what that does to different communities around when you try to create communities that are exclusive or even exclusionary, You got to pay $1,000 to show up. Otherwise, see you later. We're going to make decisions that will have a direct impact on you, but you don't have enough money to come through these doors, or you're not, we're not inclined to invite you. These are problems, and it's why it's important to understand how your ecosystem functions, what it offers and what it does not, and how you can get around that, how you might be working on your own or with others in a community, or how your community and other communities might interact and support each other, collaborate, and so on. Communicate would be nice. So what happens when you, perhaps an aspiring or nascent entrepreneur, attempt to participate in a so-called startup community? What are you getting out of it? Do the people driving the community know why they are doing this, what they hope to achieve, and more importantly, perhaps, what they hope you might achieve? And I'll tell you right now, I've already talked about this before. I don't know that any of those questions are easily answerable. I have seen this in Vegas many times. I can fix one little typo here. I've seen this in Vegas many times. Halos, that is, oh, that person must be awesome. Let's give them a halo, right? The halo effect. Halos are handed out for people who take initiative. Another typo. They're handed out to people who take initiative. But there is no assessment of the actual value of that initiative. So if you make yourself known, you will receive some accolade, some kudos, a halo, right? Everybody will listen to what you're saying. To a degree, that's interesting and that's not horrible, but you do have to say at some point, well, wait a minute, what is actually the more street traffic? Hopefully, anyway, what is actually coming out of this effort that you are expending? Because we're going to give you a lot of attention and accolade. We're going to give you your halo. Do you want a purple one or a blue one? But what's actually coming out of this? And I will contend that those halos are handed out for shininess, as in, ooh, you got a lot of attention, we're going to give you a halo, but not necessarily effective output. But if you're doing it on your own, then are you expected or required to provide effective output? No, maybe not. But it is important for the people around to understand that, oh, what am I actually getting from this? Am I a part of this community because I showed up? Am I bringing value to this, or am I taking only? There's no assessment of that from my observations. And in fact, I've even suggested in some cases, have you ever considered maybe collecting feedback from people? What do you find most valuable? What are you actually getting from this, and so on? Too much trouble. So it's entirely likely that maybe you or someone you know, consider yourself to be a part of this startup community for showing up. But is that effective? Are you contributing, or are you only taking? And even if you are only taking, are you taking? Are you just there? Does the community make the most of the ecosystem, and does it bring value or some encouragement and possibility, at least, to you as our sample entrepreneur in waiting, or does it not? So I contend that there is a weakness of the last mile example, right? I went to the meetup every month. I had my free lunch and I talked to a bunch of people. Did you talk to them again? No, I just run into them on the Saturday, and if they're there, they're there. If they're not, they're not. Well, all right, so how's your startup coming? Well, I'm going to that one meetup, and I go there every month and I ask some questions. Okay, well, how many times have you been there? Like 20. Now, I'm not going to say that some positive outcomes have not emerged, but I would question whether people are evaluating the effectiveness or if it's merely the mention. So, for example, I have heard people literally say out loud, Vegas is going to blow up. It's going to be the next Silicon Valley. Well, because you just read that on LinkedIn or wherever. People say it, and so it must be true. And I don't know. And there was a scenario where one of the economic development people from City of Las Vegas visited Silicon Valley and some other places. And the Tech Summit guy, I think, probably talks about this in this context as well. They look at like, oh, well, look, since the Great Recession, and look at Silicon Valley today, they do not consider how that came about. They believe that sprinkling cash over a city will just make it sprout Silicon Valleys. Oh, look, another tech startup with a unicorn. Yay. It's not that easy. And I don't know that people are reflecting. It's always good for an after action or an introspection or a stand up retrospective, whatever it is. You can actually measure things over time. That's one of the goals of the roundtable, was to develop an assessment scheme that the people in the ecosystem, the people that are performing entrepreneurial endeavors or trying to, and how they fit into the larger ecosystem, which includes restaurants and bookstores and food trucks and service businesses, I should say, people in the service industry. So there's a lot of moving parts that I think people will try to simplify down to, oh, do you have a meetup spot and do you have a leader who can mentor startups? Well, those are a couple of components of probably a very long list of those moving parts that may or may not be complex. They may or may not be understandable in a complication scheme, or they may just be too complicated and thus are complex. And their interactions and necessity are not necessarily easy to characterize and understand. That's why I think understanding these things from the ground up is so important, because some of these things will impact you as an entrepreneur. But if you are completely unaware of them and you don't have any access to people who are aware of them from your vantage point, from the ground, right? Oh, well, I talked to the person in the office that they had an executive meetup of 30 people, and the tickets were $1,000, and they talked about the future of, like, well, yeah, but none of the people in that room are entrepreneurs. You are. So, and this is something common I'm seeing, is that the entrepreneurs in a particular ecosystem, right? The different communities of different, hey, I'm a biology entrepreneur. I'm trying to do some biotech startup idea. Okay, well, we have a startup community, but they're mostly focused on software, mobile apps. They're like, well, okay, that's not really for me. So you can't just say the startup community, as I've said, a startup community, but there could be more than one. There's a restaurant association, there's a food truck. As you may recall, I founded a mobile vendor association, a 501c6 here in Vegas. That was fun. A good learning experience about the culture. The culture of innovation doesn't have to be about building web apps or using AI. It could be understanding the value of doing something new that will benefit you and those around you in your line of business or in your quote unquote community. So there's a lot of stuff going on here. I think if people overly simplify the difference between a community and an ecosystem, if they're using those terms in the standard ways, then you start losing information for simplicity. And I don't know that helps many people. Certainly not the people that are trying to do things. People that are being paid to try to tell people how to do things, maybe. But I think we can leave it here. It's been an hour and 10 minutes or so. So there you go. Thanks for listening, as always. If you find any of this stuff interesting, don't forget, we're trying to get the second cohort of the Genius Roundtable up and running. It shouldn't have like a year boundary. So I think the first cohort, we had a sort of a set duration, and we didn't even make it that far, to be honest. But the second cohort, I think, would just be an ongoing community of practice, if we can use the C word yet again, communities of practice that will focus on different areas. And some people will have a greater interest in some things over other things. So we can work over time. People can come and go. Hopefully they'll stick around for a while anyway. But these are the sorts of things to actually examine and understand to a greater degree. And I think by making a communities of practice approach, an actual cohort of people that are interested in this, who will actually attempt to provide some sort of outcome from conversations and discussions and so on, I think ultimately the better understanding will benefit everybody who participates in that, but also will make for a more resilient, more vibrant, perhaps, ecosystem with more effective communities within it. So there you go. I've used all my words. Nobody needs to build anything. We'll see if we can derive what emerges, understand it, and then work better with it and within it. So I think I've used all the words. That's all I got for you today. Thank you so much for listening, as always, and do consider participating in the Genius Roundtable if you think you might find it interesting. That's it. Take care now. Bye-bye.